Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. I genuinely enjoy visiting other departments and getting an idea of how things work. I've chosen eyewitness identification as a topic, and I've always got to start with a bit of a disclaimer. And it's good that I'm presenting this to the CVC, because I've not been trained as a forensic psychologist, and in fact I know very little about the sort of methods that are prevalent in the study of eyewitness identification. I have been trained as a cognitive psychologist, and I've got a background in visual perception. And what I've found over the years is that there are a few things in my research field, which is the theoretical study of face perception, that I think could be useful to how we think about eyewitness identification. And today I just want to introduce you to a few of these ideas. These experiments raise more questions than they answer, I can say that in advance. And if there are going to be heated debates, then I'd like to leave them until later. That said, I'm obviously open to questions. So when I talk about eyewitness identification, this is the basic scenario that I'm interested in. Imagine you see someone committing a crime, okay, and then they scuttle off into the dark night. And sometime later, the police apprehend a suspect, and you're then called in to perform an identity. Now, this sort of task is obviously easy when it comes to movie stars and familiar faces, okay? But of course, this is just an analogy. Most eyewitness identifications involve unfamiliar people, and in those cases, this task is really quite difficult. We've got some really good evidence of the difficulty and the scale of the errors in this task. And one source of evidence comes from filler identifications. So in every lineup, you've got a suspect. So let's just say it's this person here, number 7. And that suspect could, of course, be the perpetrator of the crime, or it could be someone innocent. But along that suspect, you've got all these other people, and there are different ways of administering lineups, but they sort across all the different types. You've got all these other guys that are basically there to make up the task demands. They're just fillers. And when an eyewitness identifies one of these fillers, the identification is instantly falsified. So as it happens, we've got archival records of these filler identifications. And they've been reported in a number of studies, and these typically show that at least 20% of eyewitness identifications are falsifiable misidentifications. And in fact, the most recent study, which was conducted by Permagrin in the UK, found that over 40% of identifications were misidentifications.
How many distractor items are there?
This varies depending on the country and the procedure. In the UK, you normally have to have 12 people in the lineup. Okay? But there are huge differences in terms of procedure. So, from these fill identifications, we have an idea of the scale of the problem. But what happens if an eyewitness picks this person? What happens if an eyewitness picks the suspect? Well, Edwin Meese, you might not know who this is, but Edwin Meese was an Attorney General of the United States, so one of the most powerful law officials, said way back in the 80s that there's no such thing as an innocent suspect. That's just contradictory. Okay? And in fact, this is a belief that has been held by many people in the criminal justice system. So effectively, what I'm trying to tell you is people used to think that if an eyewitness picks the suspect, then the suspect must be guilty. And again, we now know that this just isn't the case. And one of my favorite sources of evidence for this comes from the Innocence Project. So the Innocence Project is a project about helping exonerate people who've been falsely in prison. And a lot of the cases that they deal with are people who've been in prison for decades, who were in prison before DNA testing was developed and was available, and who've subsequently been exonerated based on this technology. And what's really quite staggering about the findings of the Innocence Project is that the vast majority of DNA exoneration cases were initially involved mistaken eyewitness identifications. Okay? So eyewitnesses make identification errors, and people genuinely go to prison on the basis of these errors. Now, of course, in psychology, this topic's been studied extensively. So I've just listed a few of the factors here. You don't have to read them all. Just listed a few of the factors here that have been uncovered and researched by psychologists. But when I came to this literature, I found that a lot of this research really tackles the problem only in two very distinct ways. The first way is to just uncover another factor that makes the task difficult. And so you've just got another factor that you can warn people about who are involved in the criminal justice system and say, look, if this is fact, then you should treat an identification with caution. So we've had factor after factor after factor to tell people that they can't trust eyewitnesses. The other approach has been to try and minimize errors that are introduced as part of the identification procedure itself. Okay, so this is about advising police how they should construct lineups and so forth. But both approaches effectively accept that eyewitnesses make errors. And what they can't do is tell one eyewitness who is correct in the identification from an eyewitness who isn't. And I think that's really quite an interesting point, because the vast majority of eyewitnesses do make correct person identifications. And the real trick is in having a way of telling those who do from those who don't. And my research has basically been based on exploring, and I'm really exploring is sort of the key word here, exploring new ways that might allow us to do that. Okay? And I'm going to present you with three different ideas today, one based on face recognition ability, one on priming, one on time estimation. Simon, I'm afraid you've seen the time estimation one already. You can switch off on that one. But like I've already said, these studies are exploratory, so criticisms are expected, right? And I'm not pretending by any means that I can give you a perfect story here. What I want to give you is some food for thought. Okay, so let's begin by looking at the first one, face recognition ability. Okay? So face perception and face recognition has always been an integral part of the eyewitness literature. But people have usually looked at this in terms of some very general effects. So for example, the other race effect, which refers to the fact that we're worse at identifying people from other ethnic backgrounds or other races, and our own has been studied extensively. So have sex differences and so on. But in some ways this is really beside the point, because face recognition is involved in eyewitness identification at a much more fundamental level. And one paper that really began to hit this home was published when I was still an undergraduate. And it was this study conducted by Vicki Bruce. It wasn't called the one in Tenton, it's not what we call it now. But they conducted an experiment that provided a highly optimized laboratory scenario for studying eyewitness identification. Okay? And in this scenario, you would basically be presented with a target face, which you could study for as long as you wanted. Okay? You would then just hit the button with one, and you get a 10-face lineup. And the task was to decide if the target is present or not, and if so, work out who it is. Okay? And the beauty of this task is that you can then give people 40 or even 80 trials of this, and so you get a bit of an idea of how people generally do. The only thing that makes this task somewhat difficult is that the photograph of the target that is presented in the lineup is a different picture that was taken a few moments later. Okay? So by and large, same pose, same expression, same lighting and so on, but it's slightly different. So what Vicki Bruce and her colleagues found was that if you look at accuracy on the target present lineup, so this is when the target is there, people can only pick the target out around about 70% of the time. And that's under best possible condition, and we now know that these really are best possible conditions. And when the target isn't there, 30% of the time, participants will also identify someone else instead. Okay? And this is considered to be an alarming rate of errors. What's also interesting is that this task still involves a memory component. So you have to remember the target for, an immediately following lineup, but you still have to remember that somewhere. And the reason why this is interesting is that a lot of eyewitness errors are conceptualized. A big part of the problem has always been assumed to be a memory problem. Okay? People are poor at remembering what someone looks like. What's interesting is that Ahmed McGrath and Mike Burton a few years ago used the same task, and they actually just presented the target and the lineup at the same time. So you're really minimizing memory factors as much as you possibly can. Okay? And performance effectively remained the same there. Okay? So I don't want to dismiss memory as a factor in eyewitness research. That doesn't, and in eyewitness identification, that doesn't make sense. We know that memory is an important factor. But what I'm trying to tell you is that there's a more fundamental difficulty, a problem with face identification, that's also a component of this task. Okay? And that's the part of the task that I'm interested in.
Which one is it?
Ah, that's a good question. I actually think this is an absolute lineup.
Is that person in those 10 faces?
No, it's not. It's a target absent lineup.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. You can rest assured that the face ability might go on. Okay, talking off that, here is something that I find quite interesting about this literature. So a lot of studies just map out average behaviour. But what's also interesting in this task is that you get a large range of performance. So there's individual variation in how well people can complete this task. And again, this was another study by Permagrin. In a sample of just 30 participants, they found that overall accuracy ranged between 50 and near 100%. Okay? And what's interesting about this is that these individual differences in face identification, and particularly in unfamiliar face identification, have since been shown in a number of other papers and with a number of different methods. So here are just a few, if you're interested in that sort of thing. So there's a picture emerging that suggests that face identification is an ability, okay, like, I don't know, playing the piano or what have you, okay? It's a cognitive ability, and some people are better at it than others. And in fact, around about the same time that this work emerged, people also started to realize that there was even a genetic component to this ability, okay? And I think from the perspective, if you're interested in eyewitness identification, this raises some interesting questions. Because if we are prepared to accept that not everyone is equally good at face perception, and we know that the face is the primary visual means for person identification, and that eyewitness identification is typically based on face identification, then this means that not everyone is equally well equipped to be an eyewitness. Okay? And so the question that arises from this is, well, can individual differences in face identification distinguish accurate from inaccurate eyewitnesses? So it's a very simple idea, but it's not as simple as it sounds. Okay? And I just want to show you some of the reasons why this might be. So imagine this is a standard target present lineup, and you've got your target there, it's number 7, it's Mr. X. This gives rise to a range of different responses. For example, you could say, yep, it's number 7, and we would normally call that a hit response. You could also pick someone else, in which case we would call that a misidentification. Or you might think that the target isn't there, and we would call that a miss. Okay? Now that's for target present lineup. For target absent lineup, you could also say, oh, he's not there, but now this is a correct rejection of the lineup. Or again, you could pick someone, and we would call that a false positive. I know this is confusing, right? But the point is this, look, in real life you don't know whether you're being shown a target present or a target absent lineup. The target absent lineup would be a lineup, say, that includes an innocent suspect. Okay? So in real life you don't know that. That's the question you're trying to answer. Right? And so you don't know what you've got. You do know that both types of lineup can give rise to a series of responses, and that there's a correct response for each type of lineup. But you're also faced with a situation where both types of lineups can give rise to cases in which an identification has been made. And both types of lineups can also give rise to cases in which no identification has been made. And somehow from this, you've got to be able to work back and work out what type of lineup an eyewitness has seen and whether they're correct or incorrect. So it's not as easy a problem as it might seem initially.
So there's something I don't understand. I always thought that when there was a lineup in a police situation, that there would be one person embedded in there who was a suspect.
Yeah.
Are you saying that sometimes they'll just give you 10 random people that are pulled in off the street.
No, what I'm saying is that you can have an innocent suspect. So the suspect can be guilty or innocent. So an innocent suspect is a target absent line. You still got the suspect in there, but it's the equivalent of a target absent line.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So look, here's one way in which we've tried to use individual differences to see if we can get a handle on eyewitness accuracy. So we came up with a very simple experiment where we first examined eyewitness identification. We basically recorded a video of a staged crime. It was a theft in a waiting room in a psychology department. Don't worry if you can't see this, it's just there to symbolize the video. We then give people a quick filler task, that's sort of standard procedure in the field, and we then give them either a culprit present or culprit absent lineup. Okay? And if you're wondering where the difference is, it's that book there. That's Rob Jenkins, who's of course also a researcher in this field. We then examine their face identification ability, and we do this with 40 trials of a 1 in 10 task that I've already shown. Okay? And we use this task because it's been used in a wide range of studies now, and we know that it gives rise to huge individual differences in performance. And of course, the last trick is to somehow explore the relationship between these two tasks, to see if you can work out what's going on here from whatever we're measuring here. Okay, let me show you how we do this, okay, or how we try and do this. So, first of all, let me give you some of the results for the face test, for the 1 in 10 task. And I know there's a lot going on here, but we just need to focus on a few simple aspects of this. So, for example, you can see that the hits, the correct identifications are at 67%, and the correct rejections of target absent alignment are at 62%. So, this is exactly what we would expect from the normative, from the published data in this field. And it shows you that people are poor at this task. What I've also done here, I've given you the minimum and the maximum of any observers in this task. And it's just really to provide an idea with the individual variation that you get, the individual differences. And you can see that it's substantial. The eyewitness test, so we run this test between designs, so we had 40 people in the target present, 40 people in the target absent condition. You can see identification accuracy is really poor. Okay, we basically get 20, 22, 23% hits. Correct rejection at 65%. So this is again what we would expect to find. Now how can we combine the two data sets? Well, here's one way of doing this. Oh, I forgot to have the slide. Just quickly, I think this is quite interesting. Okay, what I've done here is I've simply marked all the faces in red that were at some point identified by mistake as the target. And you can see, even in this somewhat limited sample, if you combine these two lineups, every single person was picked at least once at some point. And what's also interesting about this is that if you really look at this lineup, they don't even look that similar to each other. Right? So I think it just gives you an idea of the sort of fallibility of this stuff. Okay, how can we combine the two data sets? Well, here's one simple approach. These three categories represent what we call choosers. And by choosers, I mean they all represent people who've made a selection from a lineup. They've all picked a person out there. But only these people at the top are correct choosers. Okay? Whereas these are people who've misidentified someone else in the presence of the target, and these here have misidentified someone in the absence of the target. So what you can then do is you can plot the ratio of correct to incorrect choosers as a function of their performance on the face test. You can also do this for absent responses. So again, here you've got the categories of responses that are non-choosers. These are people who haven't identified someone from the lineup. And again, what you have here is you've got the correct non-choosers here. So these are people who saw a target absent lineup and made an absent response. Whereas here you have people who responded absent to a target present lineup. And again, you can calculate the ratio of these correct non-choosers to incorrect non-choosers as a function of their performance on the face test. And the question is, can that help you distinguish between correct and incorrect eyewitnesses? Well, if you do this, you get something like this. So this is the data for the choosers. I'll show that first because that's the part of the experiment I want. So on the left here, you've effectively got the probability of being a correct chooser to a non-chooser. And then we've plotted this against the percentage of hits that observers have turned on the face test. And you can basically see that the very best people on the face test are more likely to be correct eyewitnesses. In fact, the real top performers in this particular experiment were and always correct eyewitnesses. This didn't work for non-shooters, okay? So individual differences in face identification can distinguish correct from incorrect identification responses, but they can't distinguish correct from incorrect absent responses. There's some interesting reasons for this, but I don't want to be drawn into a long discussion at this point, so I'm happy to leave that hanging there and we can revisit that at the end. But what I would say is this, we replicated this with a sample of 200 students, and we got exactly the same pattern. And in fact, if you don't believe me, you can read it in the paper, and I'm happy to send you that if you have interest. I just want to show you something else that we've done with this approach. We've taken this a little bit further, as and when time allowed. So I'm sure you've all heard of some of Dan Simon's work on change detection. And one widely known paper is this one, where you have a Confederate stopping some bypasses for directions. And while they're chatting, a couple of workmen or builders pass through between the two of them, and during that moment, these two guys change over. So that the passerby ends up talking to a different person than they spoke to at the beginning. And what you find is that this changeover in identity is typically unnoticed, or is often unnoticed, and they call this change blindness in this case. Now what's also interesting is that this phenomenon is similar to something that has been observed in the eyewitness domain, and which is often called unconscious transference. So in the eyewitness domain, this refers to the phenomenon that if you see a perpetrator at a crime scene and another innocent person, then they often get confused with each other. Or people might even fail to notice that two different people are involved at all. And recently there's been conceptualized as change blindness. But in fact, you could also look at this as an error in face identification. Okay? And so, on that note, we wonder whether our individual differences approach can also distinguish people who are susceptible to this phenomenon from those at all.
It seems like that's slightly different though, because in the example you just gave, we have two people at a crime, and one's the person that did the crime that was bystander.
Yeah.
The person witnessing the crime is correctly identifying the person who's at the side of the crime. It's just that they made a mistake and who perpetrated the crime, right? So it kind of goes back to the question that Simon raised, where it seems like in the lineup, the person who's trying to find the suspect, that's their job, finding the suspect, and that's completely orthogonal to the question of whether the suspect is innocent or guilty.
It is a different scenario, there's no doubt about it. It is a different scenario, right? But what is still part of that scenario is that they are identifying the wrong person, right? Yeah, they're identifying someone who was also there, but they're not identifying the person that they're supposed to identify. So it is a different scenario. It's just a means of extending this.
Well, it seems like they're making a misattribution, right? They're getting the person correct. They're saying, yeah, that person was at that place at that
Well,
time.
see, that's also not see, unconscious transference is, as far as I understand, it's still very much a murky phenomenon. So Peter Hancock, for example, at Sturgeon has done some really interesting work on this recently, where unfortunately it's still not published, but where he found that people will often identify someone who looks a little bit like both the people that were seen, rather than either.
Okay.
So there seems to be a genuine fusion of identity there. Okay. But I think that, there might be a number of ways of conceptualizing this, right? But I do want to cram a lot in, so if you don't mind, I'll push on for now. I mean, look, okay, so very simple approach. I know the quality of this isn't great on screen, but we created a simple video of two people moving around a house. You just never got to see them at the same time, okay, and they're both dressed in black. And in fact, we built various changes in identity. So you've got this sort of illusion of continuity, that it's just one person walking around the house, when in fact you're constantly exchanging their identities. I think one of my favorite ones is actually this. You can't really see it, but this is someone walking out into the porch and putting on their shoes. And you've got a glass panel there, but you have a wooden panel at the bottom, and they sort of crouch down and put on their shoes, and then another person comes up. So we build in these sort of fun identity changes. We then ask people whether they detected these changes. And if so, many people did. And we then follow this up with our face test again. And you can then break down this data in the same way that I've already talked about. And again, you get this very, very similar pattern where you can plot the change detectors, the people notice the change in identity versus the people haven't, and you can plot that against the accuracy of the face test. Okay? So, though there's no profound truth here, I'm actually trying to tell you something very simple, and it's something like this. We often treat eyewitness identification as if it's unreliable, full stop. But what we're often forgetting is that not all eyewitnesses are inaccurate. There are plenty of accurate eyewitnesses in there. And there might be a way, there might be different ways of getting a handle on that. And one aspect that is interesting is that observers vary in their ability to identify faces. And that this variation in ability can be used to dissociate correct from incorrect eyewitnesses. I'm not pretending that this might be the case in the real world, but I think it's certainly enough food for thought in the context of these laboratory experiments. So, I have to move on swiftly, but that's pretty much all I want to tell you about that particular approach. But one thing that came out of this is that it made us wonder whether there are other aspects of face recognition that we can use to probe eyewitness accuracy. Okay? Are there other things that, as cognitive psychologists, that we know about that could be used to enhance what we know about eyewitness accuracy? And so one phenomenon that is really well known in the cognitive literature is repetition priming. And I'm sure most of you know what it is, but I'll explain it briefly anyway. So in the repetition priming experiment, you're usually exposed to lots of faces in a prime face, one face at a time. The task here really doesn't matter. It could be a recognition task, it could be a gender categorization task, it could be some sort of semantic decision, British American, it really doesn't matter. In fact, you don't have to have a decision at all. Sometime later, you're then presented with the same identities that you've seen there, some more famous faces, and also some unfamiliar faces. And you usually make famous unfamiliar decisions. Okay? And what you typically find then is a facilitation of responses to faces that have been encountered previously. Now what's interesting with priming is that it's strongest when you use the same image at priming test, but it persists across a change in image. Okay? You don't get it for unprimed faces, obviously, and you don't get it across names. Okay, not repetition priming. Semantic priming, yes, but that's not good enough. But I guess what I'm trying to tell you is that priming is a method that taps into the recognition of a face, not the recognition of a person per se, but the recognition of a face. Now this effect is incredibly robust. Some of the old academics that I've worked with used to love priming stories as final projects because it would just work every time. But there are a number of other aspects, I think, that make priming really interesting. So we know it occurs within the system that responds to the identity of a face. But we also know that it can survive many intervening items and a change in context, and so on. Okay? We also know that this is found for faces that are viewed incidentally and very briefly, faces that are seen peripherally, so that are not focused on directly, and even faces that are just seen partially. Okay? So as long as you see enough of that face to allow recognition. But what's possibly most interesting is that Rob Jenkins a few years ago found that you can even get repetition priming when observers can't explicitly remember seeing the face in the first place. So you can present faces under very high attentional load, and you'll then find that observers have no explicit memory for which faces they've actually seen, but they still show the same strong repetition priming. And last but not least, Douglas Martin in more recent years has also shown that you also get repetition priming for unfamiliar faces. And look, what I'm trying to tell you here is, if you tally all this up, you're suddenly left with a method that should, in theory, provide a very strong index of whether a person has been seen before. Okay? And it's really surprising, actually, that nobody is trying to apply this to the eyewitness. And I think what
are all of those studies, you know, in a standard priming task, they occur quite rapidly. You know,
no, that's semantic priming. So so semantic priming, you have to present two faces in quick succession, and you can't usually have more than 1.5 seconds in between. The beauty and the idea is that this is based on sort of short-lived activation that's left in whatever recognition system you're dealing with. Repetition priming is based on sort of Hebbian link strengthening, and it's long-lived. In fact, you can get repetition priming effects after years. It's not a short-lived effect. Yeah. So, I think if you look at this, and by the way, these studies are just examples. I mean, well, you would not believe how many studies have been done on repetition priming. But if you tally all this up, you suddenly think, here's something that we've got in cognitive psychology that should give you a really good handle of where the person's been seen before. And we thought, well, can we use this as well to measure eyewitness identification actors? And this is something we've only tried very recently, and I just want to show you briefly some of the things that we found. So, we basically show people a short video. We've moved away from staged crimes, and we've actually used two people. There are just two people on the sofa having a chat. It's simply there to give you some exposure to a target, okay, or to two targets. We then follow this up with lineups, and we actually present lineups for both people in the video, okay? And the lineups can be target present or they can be target absent. And obviously this is in a fully counterbalanced design and so on. So this is just to get a sort of basic, you know, laboratory measure of eyewitness identification accuracy. But we then also measure repetition priming, okay? And we don't just measure repetition priming of the target, which is actually this person here, but we measure it for all the other lineup faces, okay? Some additional unfamiliar faces that haven't been seen before, and then also some famous faces to make up the task marks. And so at this point, observers are basically given one face at a time, and they're simply making speeded, famous, not-famous decisions, okay? And this deviates slightly from repetition priming. Normally it's a famous versus unfamiliar decision. That doesn't really work because the target isn't strictly unfamiliar. I think that's an interesting aspect that, again, we could discuss in the part or afterwards. But I thought I'd point out. But you get the idea. So the task effectively very much works like this, and you're just pressing buttons as fast and exactly as you can. Okay, so with this approach, what do we find? Well, first off, performance on the eyewitness test, surprise, surprise, was poor, so we only got 41% hits, 41% correct identifications, correct objections were down at 52%. This is not surprising. We've seen this a few times today already. What we can then do is we can split up the responses that fall into these various categories, okay? And we can group the responses from the repetition priming phase according to which category observers fall into, whether they've made a hit response to a lineup, an absent response or misidentification. Okay? I'll explain this bit over here in a second. And what you find, this is for target present lineups, is that you get a very clear priming effect, where observers are much slower to respond to the target than to the other filler faces, so the other lineup faces, and new unfamiliar faces that were introduced to measure priming. Now we get this when the correct identification has been made. We also get this when an absent response has been made. And we don't get, it's certainly nowhere near significant, when a misidentification has been made. What we've also done over here is we've pulled out the lineup face that was misidentified as the target and analyzed that separately. And that's that purple column over here. And I'm doing that to show you that the misidentified target, the filler that was identified as the target, also doesn't give you this priming effect. Okay? So this priming effect really has something to do with the exposure to the target in the initial video.
Can I ask a question? So it seems like that effect though is completely the opposite of a normal repetition.
That's right.
priming.
That's right. It's a negative priming effect. And you open a can of worms there, and this surprised us as well. And I think this boils partly down to the nature of the task, famous versus not famous. I think there's some sort of possible response conflict there. We don't really understand this yet.
You think it could be familiarity, like this kind of a vague sense of familiarity that keeps the people?
I think that's essentially it. I think that's essentially it. And I don't even think this has to be something explicit. I start the literature, and you do get a few negative priming effects with faces. And I think the conditions for when you get negative priming are unclear. But what I can tell you is that we've run 3 experiments on this, and we always get the negative priming effect. We've tried different types of responses, and we've not been able to resolve this. This is, again, I mean, you're asking all the right questions, but you could be here all day. So you just have to take my word for it for now. Right? But this is submitted, so I'm happy to send you the manuscript as well. You can see if you can work something from it, and we can. Look, just quickly, target present lineups, target absent lineups, you actually get a very similar pattern. Okay? So correct rejections, these are absent responses. Again, we get this negative primary effect for the target. We get nothing in cases where false identification was made. Okay? And we also don't get anything to the falsely identified face. So there's something really interesting, okay? Which is that we get, if you sort of compare the two, we get a priming effect for the correctly identified target. We get a priming effect when an absent response is made, whether correctly or incorrectly so. And we don't get a prime effect when a misidentification has been made. And that's the case for the target itself and the misidentified faces. So what I'm trying to tell you is that what I believe this data shows is that repetition priming can generally distinguish correct identifications from incorrect identifications. And it could also provide a covert recognition index when no identification has been made. Now, I've said covert because this could just be a case of the participants have some sort of idea who the target might be, but they're just not confident enough to actually make a decision. And we didn't assess that at that point. Okay, hence covert. That's another question. But I think, again, what I'm trying to tell you is, here we've got an established method from cognitive psychology, okay, that in 3 or 4 decades of eyewitness research has never been applied to this problem. And I think even this very simple data shows you that I think this is a promising approach that deserves further development. And I think maybe the most interesting question is, why has nobody tried this before? Right? Well, you might disagree with me. Okay, so I promise you I'll get through a lot of stuff. So I hope I've given you some food for thought with these approaches that are based on individual differences and repetition priming. I now want to move on to the final topic, which is time estimation. Okay? And I know nothing about time estimation other than the experiment that I'm about to present to you. But again, the reason why I started thinking about this is the way in which some people in the eyewitness domain conceptualize eyewitness errors and eyewitness affirmation. So one of these approaches is that eyewitness identification basically depends on 3 bits of information. Okay? So the first is the initial memory strength for a perpetrator at a crime scene. And of course you could tie this into face perception and what have you, but I'm not going to do that right now. The second component is the retention interval for this information between crime and the subsequent identity, parental identity. And the third component is the rate at which the perpetrator's appearance is forgotten during this interval. Now, if you read the literature, you'll find that people believe that this interval can be established really quite accurately in police identifications. Okay? People like Brian Bornstein and Ken Dethenbacher also claim that we can estimate the rate at which the appearance is forgotten. We can estimate that really well with some sophisticated models of memory. I'm no expert on that, I'll take their word for it. But so, one of the open questions for me is, well, what do we know about the initial memory, the strength of a perpetrator at a crime scene? And do we have a way of finding out what that strength is? So, an interesting situational determinant of this initial memory strength is exposure duration to a person. So, we know from many studies that the longer you see someone for, the more likely you are to identify them afterwards. Okay? And we know this from field studies and laboratory studies, and this is actually a review of the field by Brian Bornstein, where he talks about this as well. Look, here's what's interesting about exposure duration. Exposure duration is easy to study in the laboratory. You just set your different exposure times, you know what they are, and you administer them to your participants and you measure the outcome. But in real crimes, we just don't know what this exposure duration actually is. And the only way of finding out is to ask the eyewitness. Okay? Now, we've known for many years that eyewitnesses might be quite poor at giving you a good duration estimate. Okay? And so researchers have always urged caution in using these estimates. But what we haven't done is attempt to establish how accurate eyewitnesses actually might be at providing duration estimates. There have been a few studies in this field that I'd be happy to talk about at the end, but they're not focusing on individuals. They're just focusing on adding variables to duration estimation and seeing, measuring the impact of those variables. So here's an interesting question. Can we, if exposure duration is so crucial to forming the initial memory strength that an eyewitness has for a perpetrator, can we get a handle on what that exposure duration might actually be? Okay? So, I guess our aim in this experiment was to record duration estimates for staged crime, have a look at the individual differences. Okay? We then wanted to establish the accuracy of these estimates. And I think the crucial aspect here is that we didn't do this from our privileged knowledge of these estimates that we have as experimenters, but rather we tried to find an additional way of obtaining that. And we did this by obtaining more time estimates for additional events after our eyewitnesses had already provided their crime time estimates. And we can then explore the link between the two to see if we can infer one from the other. If this is confusing, I hope it'll be clear in the next few slides. Okay, so here's how we went about this. We basically show our participants some videos of staged crimes, and we then ask them how long did this crime last for. Okay? We then instantly follow this by a lineup test to test identification accuracy. Okay? And we actually repeated this process with a second crime video to basically maximize, or maximize that one word, to collect more data. Okay? These crime videos either lasted for 32 or 64 seconds, so we either had a short or a relatively long crime video, and they depicted two different culprits, and of course this was fully counterbalanced. So some observers would see culprit A in the short video and B in the long video, and culprit A first or culprit B first, and so on. We then followed this up with 10 estimated videos that consisted of car chases and aquatic scenes. And we're really just trying, the content of these videos doesn't really matter at this point. We didn't really have any studies to go by. So we just tried to think of something that might be quite exciting to watch and something that might be quite boring to watch to maybe get two quite contrasting categories. These videos varied in duration systematically from 16 to 80 seconds, and they're always administered in the same predetermined order. And we did this so that we could compare individuals directly. So let me give you, oh sorry, I forgot about this bit. We also had an additional aim that I think is interesting. Maybe particularly at Southampton, because I know you've got a lot of people here who do eye tracking. And so there's a little bit of eye tracking in this project. And that's, we wanted to know to what extent are the duration estimates that observers provide actually related to how long they view the perpetrator for. This is, if you think about this, this is quite an important question. And it's one that's been left neglected in the field, entirely neglected. So what we also did is we recorded eye movements to the crime videos, and we then subsequently compared this with our duration estimate. Okay, so I won't give you the video, I've just got some still frames of these sort of videos to give you a bit of an idea of how this worked. So basically they consisted of someone who forced entry into a room and then went about searching the contents, grabbed something, and disappeared. We then had our quick filler task and a lineup for the targets. And in this study, we only used target present lineups. Participants were still told that the target could be absent, but we only used target present lineups to maximize data collection for this type of scenario. Obviously, we would have then presented the second crime video, repeated the process, and so on. We then showed the estimated videos, and I've just got one example frame from each, roughly to give you an idea of what the aquatic scenes and car chases looked like. So we had these sort of wonderful, colourful crustaceans and what have you, and then just a collection of car scenes from car chases from well-known movies. So it's actually quite entertaining to watch. Right, okay, well what did we find? Well, first off, let me give you the mean duration estimates for all of the videos. Okay, so you've got the short and the long crime videos, they're over here. We've just combined them for the different perpetrators. Here we've got the data for the estimated videos. Okay, and I've given you the actual duration in grey overlaid on the duration estimates. And one thing that you can see, oh, I should have probably said we run 100 participants in the study, so this is data for 100 people. Okay. And one aspect that is hopefully quite clear is that the duration estimates and the actual duration, they're actually quite close. They match quite well. Okay, so the mean duration estimates are quite accurate.
So, in that example that you just showed us, if I was doing this task, would
Yeah.
I be required to judge pretty much the length of the video itself, or would I be required to make a judgment about the physical act that the person engaged in when they committed a crime?
So I think this is something that turned out, that this is something that we've learned, that these type of questions are really important actually. We actually asked them to, I'm cutting a few corners here obviously, but we asked them to estimate the duration of the video, okay, not the crime, okay? Because obviously the crime takes place within the video and the beginning of the crime is much harder to define, right? It even raises the question of, does the search process count in it? When does the person really come into view? So the easiest thing was to ask people to judge the duration of the video, and we treat that as our crime estimate.
So how do you know that it didn't count?
Okay, so obviously for the very first video, we're really quite confident, okay? That because they turned out, they had no idea that this was about duration estimation. Thereafter, you would expect them to work this out, right? So the only way around this is to ask people to rely on a felt sense of time and not to count. That's the only thing you can really do. What we did, and again, I'm happy to send you the paper and you can have a look at it, but we subsequently analyzed the data to see whether you would get anchoring effects from one video to the next and so on, okay? Which would suggest that people are using prior knowledge to influence performance, estimation performance. We didn't find any evidence for that, okay? So, as far as we can tell at this point, we think they didn't count. But that said, it's a big problem, and that's sort of inherent in this sort of
So if they were to count backwards from 1,000
yeah.
while they were doing this thing, do you think you would get the same results?
Why would they come back with what's 1,000?
Because they count the duration, they couldn't do anything. Even if you're asking someone to not do it, I mean, you can ask people not to read text, but they can't stop themselves.
Yeah.
Or play a soundtrack of random numbers if it's just a visual video.
What you mean as a distraction?
To sort of prevent them from doing any
Yeah.
covert count.
I mean, what you see is the data doesn't really look like they're counting, right?
Well,
But-
that does.
Or actually instructed.
Well, no, that does because you stopped me early, right?
Instructed to count and then compare those results to the results.
That does because you stopped me early, but I don't think the data generally does once you look at it in detail. But I think counting is a problem, so there's no getting away from that, right? And yes, you can come up with distractions and additions to that, but it's always a problem. Look, okay, so the mean estimates are quite accurate, okay? So maybe people were counting, but hopefully you can see from the standard errors that there is huge variation in this task, okay? Huge individual variation. And in fact, I just want to give you a bit of an idea of these inter-individual differences. So for example, for the short crime video, right? Duration estimates range from 7 to 120 seconds. That's the equivalent of 22 to 375% of the duration of the video. So if people were counting, at least a few of them were terrible at counting.
Oh, some of them were slow and some of them were fast.
Yes,
That's what it means.
that's well possible. It is well possible. Look, for the long crime videos, they're even more extreme. So here, we're talking about 60% to 469% of the actual duration. And look, if you don't take anything else from this, okay, if you don't believe any of the other stuff I'm going to tell you subsequently, then what you can take from this is that people are terrible at duration estimates, right? And that hence, if an eyewitness gives you a duration estimate, you just can't place any faith in it. Okay, so this is so much for inter-individual differences. Let's have a look at intra-individual consistency, okay? Because that's what we're really interested in. Can we work out whether someone is prone to overestimating, underestimating, accurate estimating? So, I could give you tons of data here, and I've really tried to trim it down, but first of all, what we have here is we've just plotted the estimates for the short crimes against the long crimes. And you can see you get really quite a good correlation. And in fact, we perform these correlations also between all the estimated videos. And again, you can see I've just given you the range of R values there. You can again see that they all correlate really quite well with each other. So, despite the inter-individual differences seems to be good intro in the video consistency. This is just another way of plotting this data, and I know it's beginning to get messy here, but you've got the short crime video at the top, you've got the long crime video at the bottom, and what we're effectively doing is we're plotting the estimates for these videos against the estimated videos, so the aquatic scenes and the car chases on the same duration. Here we've just combined aquatic scenes and car chases, and here we're presenting them separately, so you've got the aquatic scenes here and your car chases there. But the bottom line is, again, you just find a correlation every time. Okay? You can also package this in a sort of slightly more friendly, consumer-friendly way that gives you sort of at-a-glance idea of how well someone does in this task. So what I've plotted here is whether someone is likely to under or overestimate an estimated video or estimate its duration exactly. And I've plotted this against the tendency to under or overestimate or exactly estimate the duration of the crime video. And I've done this for the short videos at the top and the long videos at the bottom. And what you can see is that people are generally underestimating time, okay? But despite that, if they're underestimating the estimated videos, they're also likely to underestimate the crime videos. And if they're overestimating the estimated videos, they're also most likely to overestimate the crime videos. Okay? So again, there's some consistency coming through here that seems to suggest that from these estimated videos, you can get some sort of a handle on how someone is going to do an estimated duration of the crime. So the other thing we looked at is exposure to the culprit as part of that. Okay? So we also asked people, how long did you see the perpetrator for? And it's obviously a trickier question to ask. And these are these estimates for the perpetrator against the crimes. So this is for the short and the long video. And here we've also plotted the estimates for the perpetrator against the estimated videos of the same duration. Okay? And again, you can see you get correlations in every case. Of course, these correlations here are particularly neat because people aren't going to say that they saw the perpetrator for longer than the duration of the video. That wouldn't make sense, that would be logical. But the bottom line is, again, you get this sort of consistency in estimates across participants. So what I guess I'm trying to tell you is that this simple approach could be used to estimate the duration of a criminal event, and more specifically, also exposure to a perpetrator. Look, let me, and I'll finish up after that, but let me show you one last bit of information that we gleaned from this study that I think is quite interesting. So we also wanted to know, do these estimates, or how did these estimates actually relate to the extent to which a perpetrator was being? And this is interesting again because eye tracking is so widely used in psychology, and it's so scarcely used in the eyewitness study, okay? That something as simple as this, just establishing how long a perpetrator is actually viewed in these sort of crime scenarios, has never been done. Right? So we, for this task, we have to assess identification accuracy for the lineup. So we split this into hits, misidentifications, and misses. And the first thing that we found and that surprised us was that we didn't get an exposure duration effect. Okay? So for a longer crime compared to shorter crime, we'd expect to find more hits, fewer mis-IDs. And we do find that to some extent, but the differences are very small and not significant. So that was a surprise, and we then thought, well, how can we understand this finding? And incidentally, this is actually something that is found quite often in the literature, and whenever it happens, people play it right down. I think there's a good methodological reason for it. So one of the things we did, and I know this font is quite small, so you probably can't read it, but we conducted the content analysis of the videos. Okay? So what we simply plotted here is how, for which proportion of the video the background is visible. That's obviously happening all the time. The body of the perpetrator, the head, or just the face. Okay? And of course, we're most interested in the face because that's how we test eyewitness identification. And I hope you can see that of all the things that are visible in the video, the face is visible for the smallest proportion of the entire event. And in fact, you also can get quite dramatic variation between different videos. I guess this is really not surprising. It's just that nobody's bothered to plot this out. So for example, we actually found that in the short crime video of perpetrator B, the face was visible for as long as perpetrator A was in the loan country. Okay? So hence, it's not surprising that we didn't get the behavior effect. If you look at the eye fixations to the faces, so this is what these scars show you, so perpetrator A at the top, perpetrator B at the bottom, short video on the left, long video on the right, and you probably can't see it, but I've given you these little grey insets because they correspond to the section of the short video that was taken from the long video. Right? And what you can see is that as soon as the face appears, basically these peaks, yeah, match exactly onto these blue rays. Okay? So the moment the face appears visible, the moment the face becomes visible, observers go straight to it. And I guess this resonates with what we know about faces capturing attention. But so the face isn't always there, but when it is there, people tend to report. So the final step of this analysis, we simply looked at whether participants recorded a hit, a miss ID, or a miss. And for each of these categories, we calculated the proportion of time for which the face is fixated. And I've collapsed this across the different categories here. And what we find is that observers look at the face more when they subsequently make a correct eyewitness identification than they make a misidentification. They also look at the face more when they make an absent response when they make a misidentification. And actually, and just on an aside, I think this is a really interesting aspect because it resonates with what we found in our repetition priming study, where we still got priming for absent responses, but not for misidentification. So some of these patterns do seem to match onto each other. And there's no difference between the two. And we also compared this with fixations on the body, and we found that there's no difference in fixations on the body for these different response categories. So what does all of this mean? Well, let me try and string it together for you in some sort of sensible way. Well, you get enormous individual differences, inter-individual differences, okay, in time estimation, okay? And in our case, this is true for the crime and the duration, and the estimated videos. But what you also get alongside that is good intra-individual consistency. So particular individuals tend to be consistent in whether they're under or overestimated. And I know that this is a very explorative approach. You couldn't possibly wheel this out into an applied setting, right, at this stage. And I wouldn't pretend that I'd want to do this. But what I'm trying to tell you is a completely new way of thinking about these duration estimates, and of thinking about exposure duration and eyewitness identification. And maybe with further development, one day perhaps, you could use duration estimates for known events to infer the duration of unknown events, such as exposure to appropriate crime. I guess I've already made this point there. So you can also use this approach not just to establish the duration of crimes, but exposure to the perpetrator. This doesn't correlate with on the perpetrator. I won't bore you with the reasons because we've already had a discussion about this and I'll get an EPS maybe. But the extent to which a perpetrator's face is fixated is linked to eyewitness items. Okay? And that makes good sense because the face is the most important means for person identification. So the extent to which you look at a face should filter. So fewer fixations, more misidentification. And if you're really interested in this, this is just in press now at Applied Problem Psychology, so you won't be able to get your hands on it yet, but if you want to, you can ping me an email now, I'll send you a copy. I just quickly want to thank Andy Vass and Janice Atta, because they're two of my PhD students. Andy has been doing a lot of work on repetition priming, much more than I could possibly present him today. And Janice has been working on the time estimation stuff, although she's now doing work on sexual deviancy, which is another one of my favorite topics that I could talk about today. But look, thanks for listening, and hopefully you found something useful. I'm happy to take lots of questions now, so I don't know if we need to give people an opportunity to leave. So it's just gone 5? No? All right.
So are you saying that there's a relationship between duration of exposure to somebody and correct eyewitness identification of that person?
Yeah.
And are you saying that's related to the number of fixations on that person's face?
That's certainly what our data seems to suggest.
So that doesn't really fit with the earlier study that you're talking about from Bruce, the 10 in 1 or 1 in 10,
Yeah.
where they can actually look at that face for as long as they wanted to.
Yes.
Right, so why doesn't that fit with that?
Well, I think there's an important, a very important distinction to draw between exposure to a photograph of a face and exposure to a moving face. And in fact, I have a paper myself that looks at exposure, duration, and time pressure actually, and its effect on unfamiliar face identification. And when you just have a snapshot, when you just have an image, more time just doesn't help that much. Okay. So once you get beyond a window of like 2 seconds, there's no real advantage. People will look for longer than that, but in the data there's no real advantage. And that's because there's no more information in that picture, right? You just have that one snapshot and you're limited by that.
So was there a relationship between eye fixations on the faces in that video of the 2 women that kept alternating and face identification?
Well, we didn't eye track that study,
Oh.
unfortunately. Yeah. Can't eye track it. I'm sure you know that as well, right? But I tell you what, if I can briefly expand on that, sorry, I'll come to it in a minute. There is something interesting here because we always act like exposure duration relates to eyewitness accuracy. And actually that relationship is quite clear under highly controlled studies. But if you actually look at the literature as well, the more realistic the conditions of the study are, the less likely it is that people seem to find that effect. And to me, this goes back to the content of the actual encounter. Okay? That the more realistic it becomes, the harder it is to control how long the face was, for example, visible for, and so on. And again, I think this is just another little aspect of the literature that doesn't get as much attention as it does.
Well, also the estimations of duration for real witnessing of crimes might be completely different to what you think
Absolutely.
original, because people often report that time has stopped still or things were went on control.
Yeah, and you're right, and you're not factoring other factors into this, like light stress. I think you know this is one experiment in a vast literature, and I'm under no illusion that it is no more than that. But what I will say is that it is one experiment that provides a very different take to what's out there at present.
Yeah, it's interesting stuff. It's a novel approach to this classical problem. I'm just wondering how, it's fine being an experimentalist and knowing who is the target and who isn't ahead of time. Have you actually thought about how you come at it from the other angle? How did you take your repetition priming studies? All you got is reaction time. You don't know whether the guy was presented or not, or whether he's. Have you thought about how you might be able to determine, say probabilistically based on distributions or something, how you might figure out, well, okay, if he was exposed and the probability of being ID under this circumstance.
Yeah. So we have
How would you
calculated.
actually take it into the plot?
We have done this, and I have to say this is why in those particular inclusions I said generally, and I didn't bore you with the breakdown of individual data. So what you can do is you can do a number of different things. You can adopt a Bayesian approach, for example. You can also use sort of simple Z-scores where you can on an individual level you can convert the RTs into Z-scores, and you can then check whether the target RT is a significant outlier. Right? And basically, we find that works reasonably well. So if people have a Z-score of bigger than 1.96, so that would be your sort of 2 to the significance level, then something like 2/3 of Z-scores that are bigger than that indicate the correct target identification. Okay? So you could argue that that's quite promising, but actually we have that data in the paper, and we're about to cut it right out because the reviewers just didn't find it, and just said, look, just focus on the general finding. And I actually agree with them. I think the approach is in its infancy. But what I also say is, and I know I'm harping on it, but what I also say is this: I think there are many ways of enhancing the measure of repetition priming. So, for example, we found that you can have other tasks in between the famous, not famous decision. Okay, and you still get the effect. And what you could also do, what we haven't done, is just give people the faces repeatedly in the repetition priming paradigm. So you get more than one RT per target, and then hopefully you get a more accurate measure. We haven't tried that yet, but what I'm saying is there's some simple ways in which this approach could be potentially
You could also collect pupillometry responses, which are much more sensitive.
That would be lovely. Exactly. Yeah. Then it's on the list. Yeah.
Pupillometry.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I'm a bit confused. You said that time estimation was promising.
Yeah.
Are you saying then that the longer somebody's looking at a face in a dynamic situation, then the more accurate they will be at identifying that? I may have misunderstood that.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
So, but, so why do you say that time estimation will be promising? Because what you showed very clearly in your clips was that when you lop out 32 seconds out of a 64-second sequence, they'll look at the faces for exactly the same period of time. So the time that they're spending looking at the faces is the same in those two situations. Admittedly, there was some other peaks out with them.
Yeah.
But it's not about 32 or
No.
64-second estimations.
And I'm totally with you. I really am. And I think what this tells you is that we've also been asking for these estimates in the wrong way in this field, right? Because you shouldn't ask about the duration of the event. You shouldn't ask about how long have you seen the perpetrator for. You should be asking how long did you see the perpetrator's face for.
But you didn't ask them that.
We didn't ask them that because when we started this, we hadn't thought that far ahead. You know, hand on heart, we just hadn't. We know that now, we didn't know then. But what's in, and you know, we've just plucked the way we asked these questions from some previous papers. But there's another question in that, which is whether eyewitnesses can even do that, whether they can even provide an estimate for the face that is independent of the estimator for the perpetrator.
But so the particular question I'm asking you is, you suggested that time estimation will be a promising approach.
Yeah.
And it seems that your own data seem to suggest that the critical aspect of the situation is the time you spend looking at someone's face. And yet you know data that show that they are in any way able to estimate how long they spend looking at someone's face.
You're right, I don't. And in that sense, you could say, right, you know, that's a strong claim, right? But I think if you focus on the positives, right? If you focus on the positives, what you will find is that you get that consistency in estimation. And that's promising. If you just got noise there, then you really might as well just pack it and ignore this approach.
But wouldn't you, okay, I understand this, but wouldn't you have to show that there's a correlation between the amount, the duration of the time and the amount of time that they spent looking at the face within that duration?
Yes, I agree.
But your data seem to show that actually, for a 32-second clip or a 64-second clip, the time that the face was available was independent of the duration.
Yeah, absolutely. And really, the ideal follow-up will ask just that question, and will find that correlation. Right? It's really, look, I know these experiments raise more questions than they answer. But what I want to emphasize is when we started this, we had very little to go on.
Sure.
Right? So that is something very obvious that we learn from this, and it's undoubtedly something I have to learn. Yeah. What else?
Could those correlations not just be that people count at the same speed across the video?
It could be. And you know, my defense is the same defense, right? It's you know, this is one experiment, okay? This is one experiment, and you can now try and find ways of preventing people from counting to get a true estimate, right? And you know, you're welcome to do so. Anyone in the field is welcome to do so. That's why we do work, and you know, that's why I present this work, because I hope that people pick up on it and they start, you know, treading this path, and maybe we'll get some out of it. Maybe we won't. But look, what I really want to make clear about this is that you know, we've got decades of research on eyewitness identification, and this research has been dominated by saying, here's another variable that makes the task difficult, right? We need to exercise caution. And the reverse thinking has hardly ever been applied. Now, I'm not saying that this reverse thinking will get us anywhere. The reverse thinking that we might be able to tell the correct eyewitness from an incorrect one. But at the very least, we should give it a bash, right? And this time estimation, you can apply this to pretty much any variable that has been found out in the eyewitness to see, can people actually report this variable accurately? What about lighting conditions, for example? Right? Can people report this variable accurately? Can we assess the accuracy of that report and so on? Right? And we just haven't done that. Right? So yes, I'm presenting you 3 experiments, and you're not going to find another 3 experiments like it. I know I'm beginning to sound like a salesperson here, but that is the reality of it. Right? And people can either continue in their tracks to show that this task is error-prone and ignore the fact that there are plenty of eyewitness sites out there that are accurate, and that we might be able to get a handle on working out who is an accurate eyewitness and who isn't. Or we can continue to put our heads in the sand and just find out the variables. And I know that's a critical approach, and it doesn't get me much kudos with the sum of one piece, but that's just how I feel about it.